Welcome to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freiborg. If you're someone who always wants to be at the forefront of understanding global policy, then you're in the right place. So please make sure you follow and subscribe right now. And remember, you can also subscribe on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. It's just a small monthly fee. It helps keep the program running, and you get access to extra content. You'll find the link for that right in the description. Today, we are looking at a genuine sea change in European politics. We're talking about the transformation of Denmark. For decades, they were kind of the poster child for EU skepticism, with their opt-outs, treating Brussels with a lot of distance. But now they're embracing the European core, and they're even leading the EU Council presidency from July to December 2025 as one of the bloc's most proactive members.
It is a stunning pivot. And I think what makes this exploration so interesting is that we're looking at a shift that isn't really driven by ideology.
No, not at all.
It's driven by brute geopolitical pragmatism.
Mm-hmm.
And the public opinion numbers, they really back this up. You've got 66% of Danes who now believe the EU's role is going to become more important.
Wow.
And it dramatically eclipses the EU average, which is only some 4%.
Mm-hmm.
This isn't some slow cultural shift.
Yeah.
It's a direct reaction to Russia's invasion of Ukraine and, the whole changing security landscape.
That's right. It's a rapid recalculation of their national interest. So our mission today is to unpack the priorities of this Danish presidency. We're going to focus on how Denmark is using its newfound engagement to shape the future of European security, competitiveness, and of course, climate policy. We really need to understand not just what they're doing, but why this shift is so powerful right now. Okay, so let's start with that cultural shift because it really is seismic. For generations, the political shorthand in Copenhagen for any, distant bureaucratic European decision was down in Brussels. It just signified something foreign, complex, and probably not in Denmark's best interest.
That phrase, down in Brussels, it was a rhetorical tool. It was all about maintaining distance, reinforcing a Danish identity against, the EU machine. It was a sign of political control. So when Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen recently declared that down in Brussels is now precisely where Denmark finds its closest partners,
right,
and where its security and prosperity are secured, well, that was more than just a speech. It was the formal burial of 4 decades of careful Danish distance.
And the ultimate proof of that burial, a real defining moment, was the defense pivot.
Absolutely. The decision to abolish their defense opt-out was the watershed event. This opt-out had been a foundational piece of their EU relationship since 1993. It allowed them to avoid participating in EU military operations, defense development, all of that. But in June 2022, Danish voters didn't just agree to change it. They overwhelmingly supported full participation in the Common Security and Defense Policy, the CSDP, with a staggering 66.9% of the vote.
And that's a record.
It's the largest yes vote margin in any Danish EU referendum ever.
Okay, I think we need to slow down a little on the alphabet soup of defense organizations because this is where the practical impact really hits home. What did that vote actually allow Denmark to do right away?
Well, it opened the door to military collaboration, to procurement synergy. Almost immediately, Denmark joined the European Defense Agency, the EDA. That was in March 2023.
Okay, the EDA.
And the EDA is the EU's hub for coordinating defense cooperation, capability development, all that research stuff. Then just a couple of months later, in May 2023, they joined PESCO.
And PESCO, for anyone listening who needs the technical side, what does joining that mean?
PESCO is essentially a structural commitment. Participating states agree to collaboratively plan, develop, and invest in joint defense projects. So it moves beyond simple cooperation to, actual integrated capability building.
So things like joint drone surveillance or something.
Exactly. Or common logistics hubs. By joining, Denmark went from being a neutral bystander to an active partner in building Europe's future military muscle. And this translated into action fast. They contributed a helicopter doctor to Operation Althea in Bosnia and Herzegovina. That was their first EU-led military operation since the opt-out was lifted.
And crucially, this isn't just about policy changes. It's backed by some unprecedented investment.
No, absolutely. That's the most tangible signal of their commitment. Denmark allocated 190 billion Danish kroner, which is roughly 25 billion euros, through its new defense agreement for 2024 to 2033. And this investment is explicitly dual purpose, strengthening contributions to both NATO and the EU and making sure they permanently meet that crucial NATO 2% of GDP target by 2030.
Okay, so let's talk about the specific geopolitical drivers, because Ukraine is clearly the central emotional and political catalyst here. The level of Danish support is just extraordinary.
It truly is. Denmark has committed something like 9 billion euros in military support and another, 927 million euros in civilian contributions.
Just massive numbers.
And when you measure that relative to GDP, it puts Denmark second in the entire EU, just behind Estonia. They have completely bought into the idea that Ukraine's survival is Europe's security.
And this isn't just about aid, it's now driving the very core of their presidency agenda.
Exactly. The presidency has explicitly framed Ukraine's EU accession as a geopolitical necessity. They're arguing that enlargement has to be accelerated to stabilize Eastern Europe and, secure the continent's flank against Russia. This commitment is so deep that a poll from March 2025 had this truly shocking finding.
What was that?
46% of Danes said they would accept Ukraine as an EU member, even if it failed to meet all the formal membership requirements.
Wow. From a country like Denmark, that's huge.
That level of flexibility from a traditionally rigorous, rules-based state, it just speaks volumes about the perceived threat level.
And on the flip side of supporting Ukraine, of course, is the challenge of containing Russia. That's a major pillar of their security agenda.
Their goal is maximum pressure. The presidency is committed to driving forward the toughest possible sanctions against Russia. They're focused on closing loopholes, preventing circumvention, which is notoriously difficult, and a specific priority is tackling this contentious Russian shadow fleet.
The shadow fleet. Tell us more about that. It sounds like something out of a spy novel, but what is it and why is a major maritime nation like Denmark so focused on it?
Well, the Russian shadow fleet, it's this vast, aging, and pretty much unregulated collection of tankers. They often operate under flags of convenience, and they transport Russian oil all over the globe, frequently bypassing Western sanctions and insurance regulations. And because Denmark controls the shipping lanes through the Baltic Sea, the Danish Straits, they're acutely aware of the risk this fleet poses, both environmentally and politically.
So for them, it's a direct threat.
It is. Tackling it is crucial for effective sanctions enforcement and maritime security, and Denmark is determined to lead that charge.
Okay, now let's revisit that fascinating strategic implication you mentioned earlier. This huge defense push, this commitment to EU military capability. It seems to be built on what politicians are calling a Plan A and a Plan B.
Yes, and this is the core insight into the whole shift.
Yeah.
Plan A is the long-standing European strategy, right? Massively increased defense spending to secure continued U.S. commitment to NATO and Europe. Basically, you pay up so the U.S. doesn't leave. But the sources we're looking at suggest that Plan B is becoming the new baseline reality.
And Plan B is?
Plan B is the necessary recognition that if the U.S. commitment falters, or if America becomes unreliable because of its own domestic politics, or, as the sources note, geopolitical friction like that earthquake caused by the U.S. threat over Greenland.
Right, that was a huge deal.
A huge deal. It fractured trust. That whole tension fundamentally accelerated Denmark's pivot towards European defense autonomy. So Plan B is that EU member states have to drastically and rapidly increase their capabilities to act alone, possibly without U.S. support. The Danish mindset has clearly shifted from relying on the U.S. to building up the EU as a sovereign insurance policy.
That reframing is monumental, seeing the EU as a necessary security alternative, not just an economic club. But while security is dominating the headlines, we can't forget the original bedrock of this relationship. So let's shift focus to the economy. It remains the strongest tie to the EU. What are the fundamentals that make the EU so indispensable to Copenhagen?
The numbers are just stark. Denmark is a small, open economy, and the single market is its circulatory system. Around 42% of all Danish exports, which is DKK 869 billion in 2024, go directly to other EU member states.
That's massive economic reliance.
It is. And analysis suggests the single market has increased Danish GDP by a full 5%. It supports over 500,000 Danish jobs. Any disruption to the single market hits Denmark hard and fast.
So it makes perfect sense that their presidency is so focused on European competitiveness. How are they planning to do that, though, beyond just saying it's a goal?
Well, as a highly regulated but extremely efficient economy, Denmark believes the fastest way to boost European competitiveness isn't necessarily through massive new spending.
Oh?
It's through what they call better regulation. This means prioritizing impact assessments to really gauge the burden of new EU laws, reducing overall bureaucratic red tape, and just streamlining the rules for internal trade. Their perspective is that of a successful small trading nation. You reduce internal barriers, make it easier to do business, and Europe can compete globally with powers like the US and China.
That focus on efficiency is classic Danish pragmatism just applied at the EU level.
Okay, let's transition to the third pillar, the green transition. This is an area where Denmark really positions itself as a natural leader.
Oh, they absolutely have the credentials. Domestically, their targets are incredibly aggressive. A 70% cut in greenhouse gas emissions by 2030 compared to 1990 levels.
70%. And full climate neutrality by 2045. They see climate action not just as an environmental goal, but as an industrial and security strategy.
And how does that domestic ambition translate into their EU presidency agenda? What policies are they pushing?
They're actively leading the negotiations to establish the EU's legally binding target to cut emissions by 90% by 2040. And crucially, they're leveraging their national expertise. Denmark is a global leader in maritime shipping. Maersk is Danish and in offshore wind. So their presidency is shaping the implementation of these targets by focusing on decarbonizing these hard-to-abate sectors, driving investment into green tech, and framing the whole green shift as essential for energy independence from Russia.
So it's all connected.
It's a completely integrated strategy.
Yeah.
Climate action equals security equals economic strength.
If we connect all these threads, the security pivot, the economic push, the green goals, it really sounds like Denmark has completely transformed its institutional approach. It's moved from a country dedicated to keeping its distance to one that's actively seeking influence at the very core.
That's the perfect summary of the transformation. They've gone from institutional skepticism to active political leadership. But, and this is important, it's vital to acknowledge the limits of this pragmatic integration. This is not a rush to a federalist United States of Europe.
So what are those specific limits? There are still 3 major opt-outs remaining.
Correct. The 3 big ones are the monetary union, so the euro, justice and home affairs, and citizenship. And while Denmark does participate in the European exchange rate mechanism, the ERM2, which links their currency to the euro, public support for actually adopting the euro is still pretty limited. And the justice and home affairs opt out the JHA one. That's critical.
What does that JHA opt-out actually entail for the average citizen?
Well, essentially it means Denmark doesn't automatically participate in EU policies covering things like police cooperation, migration, asylum, and civil law. This separation reflects a very deep-seated national desire to maintain control over their borders and their judicial sovereignty.
So it's very pragmatic.
Exactly. The fact that the defense opt-out was removed, but JHA and the euro opt-outs remain, it perfectly illustrates that Danish support is based on national interest, trade, and defense, not some ideological commitment to full political union.
That brings up an important question. Denmark historically was part of the fiscally conservative Frugal Four.
Yes.
This new security agenda requires massive collective financial investment. Is Denmark's traditional position on budget restraint going to create friction during its presidency?
It creates a major tension point, one they'll have to manage very delicately. The Frugal Four usually include states like the Netherlands, Austria, Sweden nations that prioritize budget discipline.
And Denmark was a core member.
A staunch member. But now with the war in Ukraine and the need for independent EU defense, they are pushing for major collective investment.
Which means embracing new EU financial mechanisms, and that must go against the frugal grain.
It absolutely does. They have to reconcile this fiscal conservatism with the urgent need for defense spending. For instance, they now have to support mechanisms like the Security Action for Europe loan, which lets the EU borrow collectively to fund defense initiatives. Balancing their historic demand for budget restraint against the geopolitical necessity of spending big on security, while also managing enlargement tensions like concerns over agricultural competition with Ukraine, that will be the defining test of their diplomatic skill during this presidency.
So what does this all mean for the future of the EU? I think the core takeaway is that Denmark's transition, one of the most significant shifts in modern EU politics, was driven by external shocks. The war in Ukraine and the shifting security partnership with the United States. They didn't change because of some ideological awakening, but because of a hard, pragmatic recalculation of where their security and prosperity truly lie. They are fully engaged because they realize their national interests are now best served at the very core of the bloc.
And that pragmatic success offers a really powerful model. Denmark didn't sacrifice its sovereignty. It leveraged its domestic strengths in defense and climate policy, combined it with a sharp strategic commitment, and gained significant influence. And this raises a provocative thought for you to consider. Given this successful maneuver, what lessons does this Danish model offer for other small or medium-sized member states? Countries like Ireland, Portugal, or the Baltics, who are all navigating that difficult balance between maintaining their national sovereignty and pursuing necessary deep European cooperation.
That is a fantastic question to leave you with. It really gets to the heart of what a modern EU nation-state looks like. This has been a fascinating exploration of Denmark's dramatic diplomatic transformation. Thank you for joining us for this analysis. If you enjoyed this conversation, please make sure you follow and subscribe to Diplomacy and International Relations by Bastian Freyborg. And if you can, take a moment to rate the show 5 stars. It really helps this conversation reach even more people interested in international affairs and politics. We'll be back soon with another exploration of global events.